Well, hello, everyone. I am Lisa Lobdell, and I'm the archivist at the Great American Songbook Foundation, and I'm here in the archives today. But we have a special guest with us all the way from the University of Sheffield in the UK, and that is Dr. Dominic McHugh. Dominic has recently written a book about Meredith Willson. I consider him an expert on Meredith and his musicals, but why don't I let Meredith or Dominic tell you a little bit about himself?
It would be great if we could get Meredith to tell us about himself. That would be much preferable than asking me. Yeah, so as Lisa said, I'm a professor at the University of Sheffield, and I'm a musicologist, which means that I'm interested in the history and the analysis of music, and Broadway and Hollywood musicals is my particular specialism, but I've been working now for about 12 years on Meredith Willson and the Music Man, so it's a great joy to have finally finished my book only the other day, actually. It's just gone off to the publisher, so it's very exciting, and most of the research for the book was carried out at the Songbook Foundation's archive, so it's great to be reunited with one of my favorite people, Lisa.
Thanks, Dominic. So you have written some previous books about some powerhouses in Broadway, specifically Alan Jay Lerner. You wrote a book about My Fair Lady, and then you've also written about Stephen Sondheim. Many people consider Meredith kind of a one-hit wonder with The Music Man. What got you interested in his work?
Well, My Fair Lady is my favorite musical, but The Music Man is my second favorite musical. It always has been since I was a child. And when I think about it now, I think it's very strange, really, because My Fair Lady makes a lot of sense because I'm British. And so you can see why that would have appealed to me as a child. But I wonder what it was about The Music Man with this all-American story that resonated with this young child from the north of England. And I think what it was is that even back then, I tuned into the invention, the inventiveness, and the humor and the wittiness and the unusual nature of this musical, because the score is highly unusual. There's absolutely nothing like it. And even if one doesn't value the rest of Wilson's career, which personally I do, the nature of The Music Man means that we shouldn't be so dismissive and say it was only a one-hit wonder, because it's a remarkable piece of writing. And you mentioned Sondheim there. He's one of the many admirers of this work, and he is really not an easy person to please. So I think that we can take it that there is something very special about this show.
Yes, there is. Yeah, he was kind of genius writing The Music Man. So when you began your research, what were you hoping to learn about Meredith's musicals, specifically The Music Man?
Well, I suppose about The Music Man, I was aware from his, he wrote a book about the writing of The Music Man, but he doesn't know the territory. And it's actually pretty accurate, which is the opposite of my experience of working on Lerner and Lowe, where Alan Jay Lerner's autobiography is full of, tall stories and inventions and lies, whereas actually Wilson's books, and particularly that one, is pretty accurate. And he even reproduces one or two things like the rehearsal schedule in the book, and it's completely correct. So, but I was interested to know more detail because obviously it's just a fun, lively book and it's not very long. So I was interested to know where did it all come from and how did it come about? And the strange thing about Willson is that he was 55, I think, when he wrote The Music Man, or when it opened anyway. It's very unusual for someone to make their Broadway debut as a writer at that age and to have that much of a success. The Music Man opened just after West Side Story and ran almost twice as long on Broadway, and it won most of the Tony Awards that year. So I was curious to know, where has this person come from and how did it all come about and how did he manage to do it? Because it's such an unlikely story. I mean, how did it come about? And in a way, the favorite chapter of my book, from my point of view, in terms of how much I enjoyed working on it, is the first one, where I deal with everything up to The Music Man and found out all about his early career working in the New York Philharmonic and in Caesar's band and with Charlie Chaplin and with Bing Crosby and on the radio and all of these different things that he did. And I sort of realized that the Music Man isn't just taken from his childhood memories. It's like a big conglomeration of all these different professional experiences that he had, and he stuck them all together and wrote this remarkable musical somehow.
Mm-hmm. I've kind of come to the same conclusion myself as I've delved into some of Meredith's materials here in the archives and learned more and more about him. And yeah, it really was. He picked all of these pieces from his other careers before he became a Broadway star, writing The Music Man. And it's pretty interesting, from the talking people to, again, the marches, working with Sousa and Toscanini, and just that whole, I think about his song, but he doesn't know the territory, and how he put together The Music Man. He knew the territory so well. So I can't help wondering sometimes if he was thinking about himself delving into the world of Broadway as he wrote that. So, so you started doing your research in about 2012 on your book.
Well,
and
it was actually 2008, to be honest. It's been a very long time. I started doing it properly in 2012.
Yeah, you did say 12 years.
Yes, I did say 12 years. And it happened because when I visit archives, I'm kind of interested in everything, not just the things that I've gone to actually look at, as you may remember. And then it's really a bit overwhelming for the poor archivist in these places, where I start wanting to see 100 other things that I didn't really go for. But so in 2008, I went to the Wisconsin Historical Society, which is in Madison, Wisconsin, and they had the papers of the producer of My Fair Lady. So that was while I was doing my PhD dissertation on My Fair Lady. So I went to see all of that. And while I was there, I thought, well, I have one day left and it's a Saturday, and I could go and enjoy Madison for the day, or I could get my mother to do lots of photocopying of the Music Man scripts. And so we left with about 10, 12 drafts of the Music Man and a load of production files. And so that's when I started to think about it, because the early drafts of the show are very different from the last ones. And so it kind of began there and went on. And then, as you know, when Meredith's widow died, her estate left the papers to the Songbook Foundation, and that's when they were finally made available, because one of the problems was that they weren't available before. So I actually thought that I'd wasted my time copying all these scripts in Wisconsin, because there wasn't any other material until we had the stuff from the estate. So so then I had that big visit to see you, I think in 2012, and then I came back again in 2018 and saw a few extra things, and I kind of wrote it mostly last year. So it's been a long time percolating, but it's finally done.
So you went to Wisconsin and you came here. Did you go to the New York Public Library or the Library of Congress? Do they have any materials related to Meredith?
No, but the musical material, the music manuscripts, went to Juilliard. So I did visit there and have a look at everything, but I only had, I think, half a day or a day to look at everything there, and it wasn't possible to copy anything. I had to order copies, and they were sent to me on a CD-ROM months later. So that was an odd experience too. But it has been the case that this book has required stitching together from lots of different places. So I did go to the New York Public Library, and they had a script for 1491, which is Wilson's final musical. It was a big flop. It never reached Broadway. So I copied that. And I think there are one or two things at the Library of Congress. And Michael Feinstein was wonderfully kind to me when I first met him, which must be about 10 years ago now. He had the demo tracks that Wilson recorded for The Music Man, so he sent those to me. So I've had them for a long time. I've been thinking about all this for a very long time.
Percolating. Yes, and it all came together very quickly last year, because you sent me some of the drafts of the chapters. So when you were typing very quickly and taking all that information that you'd been putting together in your head. So what surprises did you find in your research?
What surprises did I find? Well, there are unanswered questions. So the book of The Music Man, the script, was really kind of terrible. for a very long time. And you know, he worked from 1951 to 1955 almost entirely on his own. At one point, he worked briefly with his sister on the script, and there's one scene in one very early draft that credits his sister. So that was a strange business. And then, of course, she's then disappears from the whole thing. But later on, she guilted him into giving her some little percentage on the royalties for a while of The Music Man. So that was curious. And then Willson has this co-book writer. And that was a very strange thing too, because there was no real correspondence with him, but then suddenly he comes on the scene and suddenly the book gets a lot tighter and it starts making sense. I remember being surprised that Willson wrote all these character profiles. So he clearly wrote the script early on and it wasn't right. And I think he probably read it to people like Frank Plesser, who was a great friend of his. And then he started trying to work out who the characters were. So in one version, Harold Hill is an orphan. And in another version, Marion the librarian is an orphan. And in another version, they're both orphans, and that's what bonds them together. It's because they've both suffered this kind of damage. There's a version in which Marion is the school teacher rather than the librarian. There's a version in which she is the daughter of the mayor and of Eulalie. So it's a bit like Meredith tried all these characters and tried the story out in every possible permutation before working out how it was going to go. The other thing that was surprising is we had this early bound score for the show from about 1953, I think. And there's only about 2 songs in it that made it into the show, and the rest of it was completely discarded. So there's a great deal of deleted material from this show and from this score. And it really was the result of years and years and years of hard work. And it's a shame that he didn't have it in him to write something else of that quality. Although personally, I do think that The Unsinkable Molly Brown is a really good show and quite underrated. When you read it and you listen to it, I think it's pretty entertaining, and it's also got its serious sides too. So it's kind of a shame that that's not more acknowledged. But certainly his final show, 1491, is a big problem and was a great embarrassment, and it just never got right. Everyone hated everyone, and that was the end of it. So it's a bit of a sad legacy, really, that because he was well into middle age by the time he wrote his 3rd and 4th musicals, Here's Love and 1491, and he didn't really have a need to earn any more money, I guess, because he had The Music Man. It was like it could have been a one-off, and he could have just ended his career there, I guess. And actually, Frank Lesser, I found this enormously long letter from Frank Lesser telling Willson that you can't rest on your laurels. You have to keep writing because you have to have a body of works. So poor Meredith was being nagged to keep working when I think he would have happily just retired and reminisced about the past. So it's a really interesting life story. The idea of he did all these significant other things, and then he did this massive musical, and then it just kind of petered out from there. But it took a good 15 years to peter out.
Yeah, he would have. I think he would have been perfectly happy traveling with his 3rd wife, Rosemary, who kept his legacy alive, and spending time with friends and family. He seemed to be. He always seems to me in all of his writings to be one of those guys that were what you see is what you get, and it didn't matter if he was. Writing to a relative or a neighbor back home, or if he was talking, as you said, with Frank Lesser or any of the other greats in Hollywood and Broadway. Meredith was Meredith. So, and being a Midwesterner, I like that. So I like that.
I agree that he was a really nice guy. I do think, though, that he was much more cultured, and maybe intellectual is the wrong word, but I think that he was much brighter than people realize. And I was really struck, for example, just looking at the concerts he played in as a piccolo player in the New York Philharmonic in the 1920s under Toscanini, and he he played in a large number of concerts of contemporary classical music. For example, he played in Stravinsky's first concert in America, first ever concert, and Stravinsky conducted. He performed Bartok under Bartok, and he performed Ravel with Ravel, and he performed the Gershwin Concerto in F, I think, with Gershwin playing. So he was actually at the cutting edge of avant-garde music in the 1920s. And I'm really struck that must be where his sophistication comes from. I mean, he was a really sophisticated musician. And when you really look at the scores of all of these musicals, they're quite something. And of course, he wrote 2 symphonies as well. So he's much more capable than people think, because they always think 76 trombones, it sounds a bit, trite. It sounds very simple, but it's not. And it's part of this big score where it's just a tapestry of different musical styles and incredible harmonic complexity, even leaving aside the storytelling. So I agree, he seems like a nice guy, and he seems not to have gotten, terribly pompous and not to have ditched all his old friends. But at the same time, I think he slightly masked the truth of what his brain was capable of.
Yes, I think he may have done that. But reading through a lot of his radio scripts, I think the everyday scripts where he was educating the listener about the complexity of classical music and comparing and contrasting it to popular music and how they both had a place in society. I think he was trying to pass on some of his knowledge to other people. So we are going to induct Meredith into our Songbook Hall of Fame this year. I think it's about time. He's incredibly significant to the songbook, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Why is he significant to the songbook? Well, because he kept alive and also reinvented this great tradition, which is all you can ask for from all the people that are inducted into the Hall of Fame. I think he had the ability to write commercial pop songs. So Till There Was You is a really good example. And that, of course, became the only Broadway song that the Beatles went on to record. So that was a big deal. But he also saw the potential in popular music and in popular genre to tell stories in a really complex and unusual way. I think the other thing is he really was American. He was interested in the American identity. He was interested in how to express the American identity through song. He was one of those relatively few people who wrote both the words and the music, and that in itself deserves some merit. He's in the tradition of Irving Berlin in that sense. So I think putting it all together, plus the fact that in the 1950s, the Music Man was second only to My Fair Lady, and this was a period where Rodgers and Hammerstein and Cole Porter and Irving Berlin and Adler and Ross and Frank Lesser and all kinds of people, Bernstein, Sondheim, Stein, Comden and Green, they were all active, and yet the Music Man was one of the longest running of the 50s and had these great reviews and was like a new benchmark for how great musicals could be, which was not the case really with West Side Story at the time. People were very divided about West Side Story. I think that show found its audience later on, but The Music Man landed immediately. People loved it. It was the perfect escape from the Cold War. I was looking at the New York Times, the front page on the day that The Music Man opened in 1957, and it was all about war and the development of warheads and all of this kind of stuff. And the audience could go into the theatre and just escape into this wonderful story about these two characters who are both lost and see something in each other and become better people because of it. So I think there are all kinds of things about his significance in that moment and his significance generally. He played this important role during the war in the Armed Forces Entertainment Services. He wrote all kinds of songs and skits for people like Judy Garland and Bing Crosby and Sinatra to perform on the radio, Bob Hope, anyone you can think of. There's an incredible 6-minute opera called Dick Tracy in B flat, which he wrote, and it has every star that you can think of the day. So he was immersed in American popular song for several decades, and he played roles backstage as the composer and as a performer. And I think putting all of that together, it's very clear why he deserves to be inducted.
Great, great. We actually have Dick Tracy in B-flat here in the archives too. So a couple of copies, I think. We'll have to dig it out one day and play it. Well, before we end, you've sent your book off to the publisher. So you want to share with us the title and when it plans to be released and any other information we need to know about that?
Yeah, so it will be published hopefully next April or May, just in time for the opening of the Hugh Jackman production of The Music Man on Broadway. It's being published by Oxford University Press in their Broadway Legacy series, which was the series that I published my book on, My Fair Lady, in. And at the moment, it's called Till There Was You, Meredith Willson's musicals from The Music Man to 1491. But you never know, sometimes titles change.
Titles change, yes. Okay, all right. And then we have hopefully the Musicology conference here at the Center for the Performing Arts next May as well. So Dominic and many other researchers who are interested in the Great American Songbook will be here giving presentations for 3 days, and you'll have to look for more information about that on our website. So thank you so much for joining us, Dominic, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you soon about some other topics, and we'll see you all later. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you.